A warm welcome, everyone. We are glad you are joining us today. Happy to have you in this webinar. Before we kick off the presentation, including a live demo, of course, of the new PAFnow RPA Edition, let me quickly share that you can ask your questions through the chat during the presentation. And for everyone who has not yet heard about Process Analytics Factory, I want to give you a short introduction about the company and what we do. PAF's mission is to make process mining effortless for everyone. 13 years ago, we started our process mining journey. And before that, we were working in the BPM field for many years. 6 years ago, we started to develop PAFnow, which is software mining business processes. PAFnow is based on more than 10 years of R&D and backed up by 300 process mining projects. Today, PAFnow is used by Fortune 500 companies around the world and recognized as a category vanguard by Gartner, Forrester, HFS, BARC, or Everest Group. PAF puts process mining where it belongs. It's implemented in Power BI. It's embedded in the Power Platform. It's built on what's working. It's inclusive. It's effortless. Why we built it this way? We wanted to have a more accessible process mining solution so that everyone can experience the benefits. How does it work? With one click, at one glance, PAFnow gives you the full picture. PAFnow visualizes millions of data rows in a PAFnow process map. PAFnow delivers pre-built automated process analysis dashboards. With PAFnow, you can pinpoint processes with 100% accuracy to drive corrective and preventive actions. The new PAFnow RPA Edition is designed specifically for organizations to scale RPA more effectively and is tailored to the specific needs of RPA Center of Excellence teams. I'm happy that Dr. Timo Nolle, PAF CTO, and Dr. Susanne Schmidt, PAF's product manager, are joining me today, and I would like to hand over to Timo for going into the deep dive.
Thank you, Tobias. So we want to talk about the RPA edition today. And let's go on to the next slide already, Tobias. So I want to start today with this quote that we have from Gartner, because in RPA, there's really now two big terms that are all over the place, which is process mining and task mining. And while they are similar, they are also different. And if I give you now a little bit of time to read that quote that we have here, Gartner pretty much agrees with that and says there's confusion in the market between those two terms. And they say, in order to be successful with your automation initiatives, you really have to understand what are the differences. And I want to now present what is our take on it in explaining that. So we go to the next slide, Tobias. And if you think about those two terms, process mining and task mining, while the algorithms might be similar, the scope is different, because process mining, as you can see here in the horizontal green arrow that we see here, is looking at the process in its entirety from start to finish. So here it's about following the decision making throughout the process, calculating the lead times, following the whole flow from start to finish. Whereas in task mining, you really focus on one specific part of it, which is just one process step, and how you have to use the software in order to execute that process step. And if you think about that, RPA is really there to do that for you in legacy systems where you don't have interfaces that you can automatically trigger. RPA can mimic what the human would do when using the software. And this is what task mining is focusing on, trying to figure out how to execute that process step. And in a sense, you're reducing the amount of time that it takes to actually execute the process step. But if you look into the horizontal view, there's also time that is, where we are idling between those process steps. And if we cannot trigger in advance the RPA bot, this time is still being lost in terms of lead time. And this is why we at PAFnow really believe you have to start with the process view first in order to make sure that your automation initiatives are going to be successful. And this we found also in the last couple of months and years in projects that we did with our customers, because we found that pretty much the questions are always the same. It's like, okay, where do we start? Where does automation make sense? How can we measure the effect of automation in our process? How do we make sure that we can really be on top of our bots, and how can we really combine all of the different things that we need to make our process run smoothly in one place, in one system? And all of these questions, we believe we can answer with the RPA edition that we're presenting today. And this is, I think, a good point, a good place where we can move into the live demo. And Susanne, you go ahead.
Thank you, Tobias and Timo, for the nice introduction. And I'm super happy now to show you the live demo of our PAFnow RPA edition. And so in the next 15 minutes, I want to show you some of the highlights of this edition. But before we come to the highlights, I first want to provide some context about the process we see and how we generally can use PAFnow process mining in RPA projects. So let me start with the process we see. Here we have a typical purchase to pay process, which typically starts with the creation of a purchase order here and ends with a payment of the invoice. And in between, there happens some approvals, like here we have level 1, 2, 3. Then when the purchase order is finally submitted, sometime later we will receive the goods, and this will be also we will find in the system with the post goods receipt here. And some days later, when the invoice arrives, we will post the invoice in the system, and then, as I said, we will pay the invoice. Now, when we think of RPA projects, there are different phases of a project where we can use PAFnow for really supporting our RPA project. The first thing is that we can use PAFnow before we actually start implementing an RPA bot. Then secondly, we can use PAFnow after a RPA bot is implemented and monitor the efficiency of it. And we can also use it in between during actually a RPA bot is running. And this is maybe the highlight of today, where I will come later to. But now let's start with the situation or the scenario that we are before we would implement an RPA bot. And we want to find out which process actually is worth to be automated. And when we work with our customers in such projects, or also together with our partners, like the Big 4 consulting companies, we learned that there are different ways of actually finding out what is the perfect process to be automated. So the easiest one is just to look at the most frequent variants. So here I can just check this is now the top 1 frequent variant by using this variant filter here on the right side. So I can click the first one. Now I have selected the second one or the third one. So here I have easily like more than 50% of my process, which runs in the first 3 variants, what could be automated. And when I select this, you see that this field here also changed the value. Let me deselect this. The first 3 variants were all happy. So the happy path is another attribute we could use to find our process to be automated. And this is an attribute what comes directly with PAFnow. So now let me activate the happy path to see all the variants that belong to the happy path here. When I use the slider to make this one bigger, we see all cases that actually make the happy path. And then we see something we already know. So it's absolutely happy when we start with create purchase order, when the approvals happens, and then in the end, when the invoice happens. Then we see also here that it's happy when we have something like a payment block here, and also the removal of the payment block. This occurs when we have, for example, high invoice volumes. Then either a human or also a bot would put a payment block here. And only when this payment block is removed, the payment will happen. Then we see also something like the post goods receipt, which is followed here in this variant by post negative goods receipt, which is actually something we do not want probably to have automated, because this is something like a mistake also. And then we can easily use PAFnow to exclude it here from this variant. So this is another way of now having like my happy path, which should be automated. This was the second way of finding a fit or a process which should be automated. Another way is, and this was more data driven, another way is of course also to use that more theoretically driven by importing a to-be model to our process. And this is something we already prepared. So I activate the conformance check here and directly jump to my to-be model, which was, as I said, imported already in my PAFnow. And we define to be conform when a process started either with the purchase order, as we already know, or also with the purchase requisition. And then it's totally fine when it's followed by 3 approvals, or when the invoice volume or the volume of the purchase order is low, that we skip the approvals and the goods are directly received and posted. Afterwards, of course, the invoice will be posted. And when, as I said, the invoice volume is high, we will see the payment block and also the removal of the payment block. And then finally, the invoice will be paid. So now I can, let me just deselect this. Now we see the process in our to-be model. So everything what is green followed our to-be model, everything what is red is not expected, and everything what is yellow has been skipped. And now I can just use it and filter to my conform cases. And this is now another way of having like a conform model that I could automate. In this case, this is only 7 cases and 4 variants, but yeah, this is something we can automate now. Now we talked about like complete process from beginning to end, what has the perfect run through in our data, but we could also think of the opposite, like filtering now on the cases or variants that didn't run conform, and actually think about why they didn't run conform, and if we find any potential for automation here so that they would run conform if we would standardize them and automate them. For this, I jump 1 level down here in my tree map to select only the open cases, because this is probably the most interesting piece in my process to check which cases are open and if I would automate them to be like maybe on time. And this is the next attribute I want to show. So let me drill down here to the next level so that we can now select the cases that are open and overdue. Overdue means in this context that these cases haven't been paid on time. And this is something we actually don't want. Now I filter on the overdue cases and select the top most frequent variant here in this selection. And we see that this open case, which is overdue, runs smoothly through. But then 10 days after the invoice was posted, on average, we see that payment block. And now it stopped because the remove payment block and the pay invoice is missing. Now we found out that this is probably not what we wanted to see, and but we now still do not know why this process run like this. And if we would now assume or try to find out whether or not this has been automated already in the previous steps, or why it stopped here, we can easily take our filters from this page and make a drill through to another page. So, and when I do this in this map down here, you see that we have many report pages in the report, which is standard of the RPA edition. But I will now jump to the automation page and to show you some other highlights of this edition. Oh, now let me jump back. I made one mistake because I don't want to take the filter from this only variant 4. I want to only take all the cases, all 87 cases, which are overdue. So this is what I wanted to do. So now let's take the 87 cases. You will see them here again. And I want to find out what is actually going on with the automation rate for this 87 cases. And we see here in the top right corner that the automation rate is quite low for these 87 cases, and only the posting of the invoice has been automated so far. The rest of it is all manual work, and also big pieces of the posting of the invoice is manual work. You see that also in the graph here, that only this green node indicates that this is automated. Now, what is missing, as we have seen, is the removal of the payment block and the payment actually. And this could be automated because then it would trigger automatically in my ERP system, for instance, my Dynamics, that this invoice is paid automatically. But to find out whether this is already, or if this bot is already running in my system for my close cases, I remove the filters here and check the automation rate for my complete data set. So we see that also for the complete data set, the automation rate is still very low, and we have high potential actually to automate stuff in our data set. But we see also that for the complete data set, the highest automation rate for activities is for the remove payment block. So in 45% of the activities, this is automatic. But what we also see that this removal of the payment block, could actually trigger the payment of the invoice automatically, is only the case for less than 1% of the activities. So I think we found really a potential of automation here in the data set, so that pay invoice and remove payment block should be automated, and then we could probably reduce our overdue time. But this is all assumptions. We added something like a simulation here to actually find out whether this assumption holds and if it's worth to automate it. So I just changed my view by clicking this button down here. And you see I have a list of activities, and I have an actual lead time and a simulated lead time. And when I now select exactly these two activities, what I want to automate, so the removal of the payment block and then also the payment of the invoice, and change from being 0% automatic to being 100% automatic, I can easily see that my lead time drops by 11 days. So this is the simulated lead time. This is what I could save when these two activities would be 100% automated. And also, this affects also, of course, my overdue status, right? So now I found a nice potential for automation. But now I will come to the highlight, because this is something where we wouldn't stop using PAFnow in the context of RPA. The coolest thing here is that we now can use this finding to actually trigger an RPA bot. And this is why I would jump now to the action plans page. So on this page, we prepared this decomposition tree here and a Power App using the Power Platform, where I then can trigger a bot. I will show you how it works. But first, let's find something what we could actually trigger using our PAFnow product. So here we have the decomposition tree, which shows me now in the next step the overdue status by the invoice volume. So when I see when the status is overdue, then actually the invoice volume is really high with 5 million. In the next step, I could select a vendor where I also can see different vendors which have different invoice volumes. And we see for vendor 17 with 3 million euros, that's pretty also very high invoice volume. And now I can also select the case IDs to find out if there's a case that I could trigger to be automatically paid. So let me select the first one, 52. And I see here the purchase order was created, but then the purchase order was deleted. And of course, there was something like an approval, but this is actually a case which went wrong somehow. So this is probably nothing we want to automate. Now let me jump to the next case, case 53. And here we see, okay, the purchase order was created, it was approved, the goods received were posted, and also the invoice was posted, but then, and probably this was automatic because it's 1 second later, and payment block was set. And now we want to remove the payment block so that the payment of the invoice will be triggered automatically. And now I can use this Power App here, where I select the purchase order ID, and here I can type in the approver who is actually or should be responsible to remove this payment block here. In the demo, I just type in my email address, because then I can demo you what happens. Type in my email address and click Run Bot. And now what happens in the background is that it takes this purchase order ID, goes to my Dynamics, pulls the master data for this purchase order and this vendor, and sends me an email so that I can approve now, because I'm the approver, to, yes, here it is, my flow message. So the approval, you see new payment request for vendor 17 for this purchase order ID. And here I have a nice summary for what material group, what document type. Here I see also the invoice volume. And now I just click to approve, click submit. And now I removed, let me jump back to here. I removed the payment block. What happens now in the background is again that it goes to my dynamics and it triggers the payment of the invoice. When this is done, I can refresh my data set. So now I have the information that the invoice is actually paid. I refresh my data set, and you see here now the case 53 is open. But now after I paid the invoice, of course, this one case is closed. And you see that it ran through and the invoice is paid. So I love that feature using Power Automate and Power Apps, and yeah, so I hope you liked it as well. And let me go back to, or give it back to Tobias.
Thank you, Susanne. This is awesome. Really love it. Haven't seen it a couple of times now, but still like it a lot. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Let me answer one question, which might be coming up now. So the question is, why did we launch the PAFnow RPA Edition? And actually, it goes back 4 or 5 years when we had a meeting with a very large telecom operator. We did a process mining project and we presented the results to the CFO and his team. And after we presented our results and we had a great meeting and they got great insights, he turned around into my direction and told me, hey, Tobias, then one thing must be very clear to you. It is not enough if you guys make us smarter. We expect you to make us better. And this triggered the point of we need to help our clients, not just to get the insights, but also to get from insights into actions, into automation. And that's why our PAFnow Premium Edition for RPA tackles the following problem. Fast ROI on RPA is difficult if organizations don't use bots on large scale, as we hear from a lot of companies around the world. Lots of organizations already have implemented bots through proof of concept, but they are really getting frustrated and disillusionized quite fast because the scalability of RPA is difficult when you don't know your process. At the same time, the necessary process discovery via interview workshops and value stream mapping is time consuming and costly. That's why process mining using log files from operational applications such as ERP, CRM, or workflow to automatically visualize any end-to-end process in the fraction of a time and for much lower prices is value-adding stuff. Now, PAFnow RPA Edition offers you a solution that helps the user to understand where to best start automating an end-to-end process, and that specifically tackles common questions and problems of every RPA project. So what's next? So we like to offer you help and support so you can feel free to reach out to PAF at any time. And as you can see here from this PowerPoint slide, there is much more information available to you, such as the one-pager. We also have the press release of the RPA edition on our website. There is, by the way, also a recording of this webinar, which we're going to share afterwards. And there's another webinar for the next upcoming PAFnow edition, which is the BPM one, coming up very soon. So feel free to join us here as well. If you're interested in a PAFnow test drive, let us know. So we're here for you, and you can either use the form on our website to reach out to us, or you can also send us an email to info@pafnow.com. So this is part of the PAFnow team. We are here to make your process mining and RPA journey a success. Thanks for joining us today. It was great having you. We look forward to talking to you soon again, and stay safe, stay healthy, all the best for you. And again, thanks for joining. Bye-bye for now.